Start packing. You can stay with a friend. My mother-in-law drawled swirling tea in my favorite ceramic mug like she owned the place. The burgundy roses painted on that cup had belonged to my grandmother, but Patricia acted like everything here belonged to her precious son. You're independent, aren't you? Her voice dripped with mock sweetness as she watched me standing frozen in my own kitchen. I looked at my husband Derek, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his mother she'd crossed every line. He didn't even flinch. His eyes stayed glued to his phone screen, scrolling through whatever was more important than his wife being humiliated. Fine, whatever, I smiled, hiding the rage building in my chest. 4 hours later, I dragged my suitcase upstairs while Patricia's laughter echoed from the living room. The house felt different now, like the walls themselves had turned against me. I'd bought this place with my inheritance money after Dad passed away 2 years ago, every single dollar coming from his life insurance and the sale of his small business. Derek hadn't contributed a penny, but somehow his mother acted like I was the intruder here. My hands shook as I opened our bedroom dresser. The joint savings account statements I kept in the top drawer were gone. Panic shot through my veins as I grabbed my laptop and logged into our online banking. The screen showed a balance of $7.33. 3 months ago, we'd had $18,000 saved up. Derek had emptied everything without telling me. I rushed to my wallet, pulling out credit cards that should have worked perfectly fine. The first one got declined when I tried to book a hotel room online, then the second, the third. Derek had somehow canceled every card that had my name on it. My phone buzzed with a text from the bank. Account holder Derek Williams has removed authorized user privileges. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I sank onto the bed we'd shared for 3 years, staring at the wedding photo on the nightstand. We looked so happy in that picture me in the vintage lace dress I'd found at a thrift store, Derek grinning as he twirled me around on the dance floor. When had everything started going wrong? My laptop chimed with a new email notification. The sender's name made my blood freeze. Stephanie Larson, Derek's coworker from the insurance company where he worked as a claims adjuster. The subject line read, "Can't wait for tonight." Against my better judgment, I clicked it open. Derek, I can hardly focus at work thinking about our weekend plans. When you finally get rid of her, we can stop sneaking around. I love you so much, and I can't wait to move in with you properly. This house is going to be perfect for us. See you at 7. XOXO, Steph. My stomach lurched. I scrolled through Derek's email account, which he'd foolishly left logged in on our shared computer. Message after message revealed an affair that had been going on for 8 months. 8 months of lies, secret meetings, and plans to steal my home right out from under me. Patricia's voice drifted up from downstairs, talking on the phone with someone. Oh yes, she's finally packing. Derek found someone much more suitable. This Stephanie girl understands family loyalty, unlike Miss Independent down there. Some women just aren't meant for marriage, too stubborn and selfish. I realized she was talking to my sister, Jenny. The betrayal deepened when I heard Jenny's voice through the speaker. I always thought Amina was too controlling. Maybe this is for the best. Derek deserves someone who will appreciate him. The people I'd trusted most in the world had all turned against me. I stuffed clothes into my suitcase randomly, not caring what I grabbed. The only hotel I could afford with my emergency cash was a rundown motel on the highway, the kind of place with peeling paint and cigarette burns in the carpet. As I loaded my car, Patricia stood in the doorway holding my grandmother's mug like a trophy. Don't forget to return the house keys, dear. This is Derek's home now. At the motel, I tried calling my friend Marcus, the only lawyer I knew personally. We'd gone to college together, and he'd always been someone I could count on for honest advice. His voicemail picked up after 3 rings. Marcus, it's Amina. Something terrible is happening, and I need legal help. Derek is trying to steal my house, and I think he's been planning this for months. Please call me back as soon as you get this. I collapsed onto the scratchy motel bedspread and finally let myself cry. 3 hours later, Marcus called back with news that made everything so much worse. Oh, it's Amina. I'm looking at some paperwork here. Derek filed preliminary divorce documents last week claiming adultery on your part. He's listed multiple witnesses who supposedly saw you with other men. This is serious. He's trying to paint you as the unfaithful spouse to strengthen his case for the house. The room spun around me. Not only was Derek cheating, but he was accusing me of the same thing. The lies were so elaborate, so carefully planned. I realized this wasn't a sudden decision born from an affair. This was a calculated attack designed to destroy my life and steal everything I'd worked for. Marcus arrived at the motel the next morning with coffee and a grim expression. His usually neat brown hair looked disheveled and dark circles shadowed his eyes. I've been up all night researching your case. Derek and Patricia hired Robert Williamson. The name meant nothing to me, but Marcus's worried tone suggested it should. He's one of the most ruthless divorce attorneys in the state, specializes in what he calls asset protection for wealthy families. His reputation is built on finding legal loopholes to strip assets from unsuspecting spouses. We sat at the tiny motel table while Marcus spread out paperwork like he was preparing for battle. Here's what they're claiming. Derek says the house belongs to him because marriage makes all property communal regardless of who paid for it, but that's not the worst part. He showed me a stack of receipts, all bearing Derek's name. According to these documents, he'd supposedly contributed $15,000 toward the down payment. The receipts looked official, complete with bank stamps and transaction numbers. The problem was Derek had never had $15,000 in his entire life. These are forgeries, I said, studying the papers. Derek was working part-time at a pizza place when I bought the house. He barely made enough to cover his car payment. Marcus nodded grimly. I know that, and you know that, but proving forgery in court is incredibly difficult when the documents look this professional. And there's more. Patricia had somehow produced loan documents claiming she'd lent Derek $20,000 for the house purchase. The paperwork showed her signature, Derek's signature, and notary stamps. It was all completely fabricated, but it looked convincing enough to fool a judge who didn't know the real story. They're basically claiming that between Derek's supposed contribution and his mother's loan, the house purchase was a family investment rather than your individual inheritance money, Marcus explained. If a judge believes this, you could lose everything. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop fighting this, Amina. You're only making it harder on yourself. This could all be over quickly if you just accept reality. Stephanie. The audacity took my breath away. Derek's mistress was now texting me, directly acting like she had any right to be part of this conversation. I showed Marcus the message and his jaw tightened. We need to document everything. Every text, every email, every conversation. They're building a case designed to paint you as an unstable, unfaithful wife who doesn't deserve the marital assets. That afternoon, Marcus and I went to the courthouse to review the official divorce filing. Derek's legal team had been thorough. Stephanie was listed as a witness who would testify about my supposed affairs. 3 other people I'd never heard of were also listed as witnesses to my alleged infidelity. The claims were specific and detailed. According to the filing, I'd been seen at restaurants with different men staying out late and behaving inappropriately at work functions. Every accusation was a complete lie, but they were presented with dates, times, and locations that sounded believable. This level of detail suggests they've been planning this for months, Marcus said, reading through the documents. Someone has been following you, documenting your daily routine, and then creating false narratives around your normal activities. I remembered all the times in recent months when Derek had asked detailed questions about my work schedule, my lunch meetings with clients, my evening yoga classes. I thought he was being supportive and interested in my life. Instead, he'd been gathering intelligence for his legal attack. That evening, I returned to the motel to find my room had been broken into. Nothing valuable was missing because I didn't have anything valuable with me, but my papers were scattered everywhere. The few important documents I'd managed to grab from the house were gone, including my father's original will and some bank statements that prove the inheritance money's source. The motel manager, a tired-looking man named Bill, apologized, but said their security cameras hadn't been working for weeks. Happens sometimes in a place like this. Probably just kids looking for drugs or cash. But I knew better. This wasn't random. Someone had specifically targeted the documents that could help prove my case. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. I called Marcus, my voice shaking as I described the break-in. They're not just trying to steal my house through legal manipulation, they're actively sabotaging my ability to defend myself. This confirms what I suspected, Marcus said. This isn't just a messy divorce. It's a coordinated campaign designed to isolate you and eliminate your resources. We're dealing with people who are willing to commit crimes to get what they want. Over the next 2 days, I discovered just how deep the conspiracy went. Friends who'd known Derek and me for years started treating me coldly. When I ran into our neighbor Helen at the grocery store, she actually turned and walked away without speaking. Later, I learned that Patricia had been calling everyone in our social circle for weeks, telling them that I'd been having affairs and planning to divorce Derek to steal his money. The lies were so convincing that even people who should have known better began to believe them. Patricia had painted herself as the concerned mother trying to protect her son Darm from a manipulative wife. She'd shown people the forged loan documents as proof that the Williams family had invested in the house purchase. "She's been preparing the ground for months," Marcus explained after interviewing some of our mutual friends. "By the time Derek filed for divorce, Patricia had already convinced half your social circle that you were the villain in this story." The isolation was devastating. Every day brought new revelations about how thoroughly my life had been undermined. My reputation, my finances, my home, and my relationships had all been systematically attacked. The people who should have supported me had been turned against me through carefully crafted lies. But the worst discovery came when Marcus found evidence that this wasn't Patricia's first time orchestrating this type of scheme. Derek had been married once before, right after high school, to a girl named Sarah Mitchell. That marriage had lasted only 18 months and ended with Sarah losing her small inheritance from her grandfather's estate. "And the pattern is almost identical," Marcus said, showing me the divorce records from Derek's first marriage. Accusations of infidelity, disputed property ownership, mysterious loans from Patricia, and character witnesses who painted Sarah as unstable and unfaithful. Sarah had disappeared after the divorce, leaving town with nothing. No one knew where she'd gone or what had happened to her. The realization that I was just the latest victim in a long-term pattern of financial abuse made my blood run cold. Patricia and Derek weren't just thieves. They were predators who specialized in identifying women with assets and then systematically destroying their lives to steal their money. The preliminary court hearing felt like a public execution. Judge Martha Brennan, a stern woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, listened to Derek's attorney present his case with all the theatrical flair of a seasoned prosecutor. Robert Williamson stood at the podium like he owned the courtroom, his expensive suit and confident demeanor commanding attention. "Your Honor, we're dealing with a woman who has systematically deceived her husband about her fidelity and her intentions. Mrs. Williams used her inheritance money to purchase a house, but she did so with the understanding that it would be a family investment. My client contributed substantial funds to this purchase, and his mother provided additional financial support through a documented loan. The forged receipts and fake loan documents looked official under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. Williamson presented each piece of fabricated evidence with the confidence of someone who knew the truth didn't matter as much as the appearance of truth. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have multiple witnesses who can testify to Mrs. Williams's inappropriate behavior with other men. Her pattern of infidelity demonstrates a fundamental breach of the marital contract and makes her unfit to claim marital assets. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell everyone that every word was a lie. But Marcus had coached me to stay calm, to let him handle the legal arguments, while I focused on not giving them any ammunition to use against me. Judge Brennan examined the documents with the detached professionalism of someone who'd seen thousands of similar cases. To her, this was just another divorce dispute between two people who couldn't work things out. She had no way of knowing that she was looking at an elaborate fraud designed to steal my inheritance. Based on the preliminary evidence presented, I'm granting a temporary restraining order that prevents Mrs. Williams from entering the marital home until this matter can be resolved through proper channels. Mr. Williams will maintain residence in the property pending the final divorce decree. The gavel's sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. I was officially homeless, banned from entering the house I'd bought with my own money. Derek sat beside his lawyer, avoiding eye contact, but unable to hide the small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Outside the courthouse, Marcus tried to reassure me. This is just temporary. Once we gather more evidence and expose their lies, we can get this reversed. But we need to be patient and methodical. Patient. The word felt like a luxury I couldn't afford while Derek and Stephanie were living in my house, sleeping in my bed, and probably redecorating with my grandmother's antiques. That afternoon, Derek moved Stephanie in like they were newlyweds starting their life together. Our neighbor Helen called to tell me she'd seen them carrying suitcases and laughing as they walked up the front steps. The speed of it felt like another calculated insult, proof that this had all been planned long before they'd bothered to tell me. My job at Reynolds Marketing started suffering as Patricia's poison spread through professional networks. She'd somehow managed to reach people I worked with, spreading rumors about my mental stability and personal problems. Conversations stopped when I entered conference rooms. Co-workers who'd been friendly for months suddenly seemed uncomfortable around me. My boss, Jennifer Cruz, called me into her office on a Thursday afternoon. Jennifer had always been supportive of my work, and I'd hoped she would see through whatever lies she'd heard. Instead, she looked uncomfortable and avoided direct eye contact. Gissa Amina, I've been hearing some concerning things about your personal situation. Several clients have mentioned they're worried about your stability and focus. The Henderson account specifically requested a different account manager. The Henderson account was my biggest success story, a family-owned restaurant chain that had tripled their revenue after implementing my marketing strategies. I'd worked with them for 8 months, building genuine relationships with the owners. The idea that they'd suddenly lost confidence in me felt impossible. What exactly did they say? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jennifer shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. They said they'd heard you were going through a difficult divorce and that your behavior had become unpredictable. Someone told them you'd been making poor decisions and that your judgment couldn't be trusted. Patricia's reach extended further than I'd imagined. She'd managed to poison my professional reputation along with my personal one. The systematic destruction of my life was so thorough it took my breath away. I can assure you that my personal situation hasn't affected my work performance, I said. Every project I've handled has been delivered on time and exceeded expectations. I know your work has been solid, Jennifer said, but perception matters in this business. Clients need to feel confident in their account managers. Maybe you should consider taking some time off to get your personal life sorted out. Time off meant no income. No income meant no ability to fight Derek's legal team. The trap was closing around me from every direction, cutting off escape routes I didn't even know I'd need. That evening, I sat in the motel room counting my remaining cash. After paying for another week of accommodation and buying basic necessities, I had less than $300 left. My credit cards remained canceled and my bank accounts were still frozen pending the outcome of the divorce proceedings. I'd never felt so alone in my life. Jenny still refused to speak to me, convinced by Patricia's lies that I was the villain in this story. My few remaining friends seemed afraid to get involved, worried about taking sides in what they viewed as a messy divorce situation. The worst part was discovering how thoroughly Patricia had researched my background before executing her plan. I found evidence that she'd been investigating my father's estate value for over a year, probably from the moment Derek first mentioned my inheritance. Old emails in Derek's account showed Patricia asking detailed questions about my family's financial situation, disguised as innocent interest in getting to know her son's girlfriend better. She'd known exactly how much money I'd inherited, down to the dollar amount. She'd researched the value of my father's small electrical contracting business and calculated how much the life insurance payout would be. The house theft wasn't an opportunistic grab for assets. It was the culmination of a year-long investigation and planning process. Patricia had studied me like a predator studies prey, identifying my weaknesses and figuring out exactly how to exploit them. She'd recognized that I was independent and proud, unlikely to ask family for help. She'd observed that my closest relationships were with Derek and Jenny, making it easy to isolate me by turning them against me. Most devastatingly, she'd realized that my inheritance money represented the only significant assets I'd ever have. Unlike Derek's first wife, Sarah, who'd inherited farmland that could be sold gradually, my inheritance was tied up in the house. If Patricia could steal the house, she could steal everything. The level of premeditation made me feel sick. This wasn't a marriage that had gone wrong or a family dispute that had gotten out of hand. This was a carefully planned crime designed to destroy my life and transfer my assets to people who'd never worked for them. Late that night, I called Marcus one more time. I need to know the truth about what happened to Sarah. If we can find her and get her to testify about Patricia's pattern of behavior, maybe we can prove this is all a setup. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I've been thinking the same thing. If Derek and Patricia did this before, Sarah might be the key to exposing their whole operation. But finding someone who disappeared 3 years ago won't be easy. Oh, it's the only chance I have left, I said, because if we can't prove this is fraud, I'm going to lose everything. The next morning brought even worse news. Derek's gambling debts, which I'd suspected but never confirmed, were apparently much larger than I'd imagined. Marcus had hired a private investigator named Tony Rodriguez, who discovered that Derek owed serious money to some very dangerous people. He's in debt to a loan shark operation run by someone called Big Mike, Tony explained over the phone. We're talking about $50,000 in gambling losses, mostly from underground poker games and sports betting. These aren't the kind of people who accept payment plans. The timing made perfect sense. Derek needed money desperately, and my house represented the solution to his problems. He could sell it, pay off his debts, and start fresh with Stephanie. Patricia's scheme wasn't just about stealing my inheritance for family wealth. It was about saving Derek's life. But none of that mattered to the legal system. The forged documents looked real, the witness testimonies sounded believable, and Derek's financial desperation wasn't visible to judges who only saw what lawyers presented in court. I was losing everything to people who'd never contributed anything, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Helen, our elderly neighbor who'd been avoiding me since the divorce proceedings began, called my motel room on a Tuesday evening. Her voice sounded nervous, almost whispered, like she was afraid someone might overhear. "Amina, I need to tell you something important. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on Maple Street tomorrow morning, early before anyone else is around?" Helen had lived next to my house for 15 years, watching the neighborhood change as young families moved in and out. She'd always been friendly, but kept to herself, the kind of neighbor who waved from her garden but rarely got involved in other people's business. At 7 in the morning, I found Helen sitting in the back corner of Sunrise Cafe, clutching a cup of tea with both hands. She looked older than I remembered, her white hair thinner and her hands shaking slightly. I've been feeling terrible about how I treated you at the grocery store, she began. Patricia has been telling everyone such awful stories, and I believed them at first. But yesterday, I heard something that made me realize what's really happening here. Helen explained that Patricia had been visiting her regularly for weeks, supposedly to check on her well-being, but actually to spread gossip and gather information about my daily routine. Yesterday, Patricia had gotten careless. She was sitting on my porch drinking lemonade and talking about how well Derek was doing with his new girlfriend. She said something like, "It's so much easier when you find a woman who knows her place." Amina never understood that the money was supposed to be for the family, not just for her selfish dreams. The casual admission revealed Patricia's true mindset. She genuinely believed that my inheritance money should have become family property the moment I married Derek. In her worldview, wives existed to support their husbands financially, not to maintain independence. But then she said something that really bothered me, Helen continued. She started laughing about how easy it was to fool you, how Derek had been asking you questions about your money for months, and how stupid you were for trusting him. She said the hardest part was teaching Derek how to lie convincingly about contributing to the house purchase. Helen had secretly recorded this conversation on her phone. Patricia's voice was clear as she bragged about the elaborate deception, describing how they'd created fake receipts and forged loan documents. She even laughed about how Derek had panicked when he first had to lie under oath, worried he'd give away the truth. I felt so ashamed listening to her talk about you like that, Helen said. You've always been a good neighbor, and I should have known better than to believe her lies. The recording was exactly what Marcus and I needed to start fighting back. Patricia had essentially confessed to fraud while thinking she was safe among friends. Her arrogance had finally become her weakness. Marcus immediately contacted Tony Rodriguez, the private investigator, to expand his research into Derek's background. What Tony discovered painted an even darker picture of the conspiracy against me. Derek's gambling addiction was worse than we'd initially thought. Tony found evidence of debts stretching back 3 years, including loans from multiple illegal operations. Derek had borrowed money from anyone willing to lend it, using his relationship with me as collateral. He's been telling these loan sharks that he'd soon have access to significant assets through his marriage, Tony explained during our meeting at his small office downtown. Some of these guys have been waiting for over a year to get paid, and they're getting impatient. The private investigator had also managed to track down some of Derek's gambling associates' men who frequented the underground poker games where he'd lost most of his money. One of them, a mechanic named Carlos, was willing to talk about Derek's behavior during card games. "Maza, Derek used to brag about his rich wife all the time," Carlos had told Tony. He'd say stuff like, "Don't worry about the money, my wife's loaded and doesn't even know how good she's got it." He talked about that house like it was already his to sell. Even more damaging was Carlos's testimony about Patricia's involvement. Derek's mom came to a game once, maybe 6 months ago. She wanted to see where her son was spending his time. She started asking questions about how much Derek usually lost, like she was calculating something. Real cold lady treated Derek like he was still 12 years old. Patricia had known about Derek's gambling problems and his debts. Rather than helping him get treatment or counseling, she'd seen an opportunity to solve the problem by stealing from his wife. The house theft wasn't just about greed. It was a calculated solution to Derek's criminal obligations. Tony's investigation revealed even more disturbing details. Security cameras from businesses near my motel had captured footage of Derek and Patricia breaking into my room on the night my documents were stolen. The timestamp showed them entering through a window at 2 in the morning, spending nearly an hour inside and leaving with a bag full of papers. They were specifically targeting anything that could prove your inheritance claim, Tony explained. This wasn't random vandalism. They knew exactly what they were looking for and where to find it. The break-in constituted multiple felonies, including burglary, theft, and conspiracy. More importantly for my case, it proved that Derek and Patricia were willing to commit crimes to support their fraud. No innocent person would need to steal documents from their opponent's motel room. Meanwhile, Marcus had been working another angle. Stephanie, Larson Derek's girlfriend and supposed witness to my infidelity, was starting to crack under the pressure of maintaining her lies. Marcus had arranged for a private conversation with her ostensibly to discuss her witness testimony. During that meeting, Stephanie revealed crucial information about Patricia's manipulation tactics. Mrs. Williams has been coaching me on what to say for months, Stephanie admitted. She told me exactly what stories to tell about seeing Amina with other men. She even gave me specific dates and locations to make it sound more believable. Stephanie explained that Patricia had offered her $5,000 to testify against me, money that came from the church fundraising account Patricia managed. The bribery was not only illegal, but also involved theft from religious organizations. I'm starting to realize how wrong this all is, Stephanie said. Patricia keeps talking about how women like Amina need to be taught lessons about family loyalty. It's getting scary how obsessed she is with destroying your life. The most shocking revelation came when Stephanie mentioned Patricia's stories about Derek's first wife. She talks about this Sarah girl all the time like she's proud of what they did to her. Mrs. Williams says Sarah was another selfish woman who didn't understand family values, and they had to teach her a lesson too. Patricia had apparently kept detailed records of her scheme against Sarah, treating it like a successful business model that could be replicated. She'd studied what worked and what didn't, refining her approach for maximum effectiveness against future targets. "Oh, she showed me a photo album once," Stephanie continued. "Pictures of Sarah's house before Derek married her and pictures of it after the divorce when it got sold. Mrs. Williams called it before and after shots of family justice. It was really creepy." The photo album proved that Patricia viewed the destruction of women's lives as a hobby, something to be documented and celebrated. The level of malice involved went far beyond simple financial theft. This was psychological warfare designed to break women's spirits along with their bank accounts. Marcus and I now had multiple pieces of evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy. Helen's recording of Patricia's confession, Tony's surveillance footage of the break in Carlos's testimony about Derek's gambling bragging, and Stephanie's admission of perjury and bribery created a comprehensive picture of criminal fraud. But we needed to find Sarah to truly cement our case. If Derek and Patricia had destroyed one woman's life before mine, Sarah's testimony could prove this was a pattern of predatory behavior rather than a legitimate marital dispute. Tony had been searching public records for any trace of Sarah Mitchell's whereabouts since her divorce 3 years ago. The trail had gone cold after she'd left town, with nothing but persistence finally paid off when he found a forwarding address from her old apartment complex. Sarah was living in Portland, Oregon, working as a nurse at a children's hospital. When Tony called to explain the situation, her reaction was immediate and intense. "I've been waiting 3 years for someone to investigate what those people did to me," Sarah said. "I have boxes of evidence that I never got to use in court because I couldn't afford a good lawyer. If you can stop them from doing this to someone else, I'll do whatever it takes to help." Sarah's story was almost identical to mine down to the smallest details. Patricia had befriended her during the early months of her marriage to Derek, gathering information about her family's farm inheritance. Derek had accumulated gambling debts and needed money quickly. The same forged documents, the same witness testimonies, the same systematic character assassination. "The worst part was how they made me feel crazy," Sarah explained during our phone conversation. "Everyone believed their lies, and I started wondering if I was actually the terrible person they said I was." It took years of therapy to recover from what they did to my sense of reality. Sarah had kept every document from her case, including evidence that Derek's lawyer had knowingly submitted false information to the court. She'd also discovered that Patricia had stolen money from multiple organizations to fund the legal attack using her position as church treasurer to embezzle funds. Oh, I've been building a case against them for 3 years, waiting for the right opportunity to expose what they do to women, Sarah said. If you're ready to fight, I'm ready to help you destroy them. The tables were finally turning. Patricia's arrogance and Derek's desperation had created a trail of evidence that could expose their entire operation. With Sarah as our star witness and multiple pieces of documentary proof, we were ready to shift from defense to offense. The real battle was about to begin. Marcus arranged a meeting with FBI agent Claire Rodriguez, who specialized in financial fraud cases involving elderly victims. Initially, Agent Rodriguez had seemed skeptical about our claims, viewing them as typical divorce disputes rather than federal crimes. But when Marcus presented Helen's recording Tony's surveillance footage and evidence of Patricia's church embezzlement, her attitude shifted completely. Now, Mrs. Thompson, what you're describing is a sophisticated fraud operation that crosses state lines and involves multiple victims, Agent Rodriguez said during our meeting at the federal building downtown. The pattern you've identified suggests this isn't isolated criminal activity, but rather an ongoing enterprise. The FBI's interest focused particularly on Patricia's theft from religious organizations. Federal authorities took church fraud seriously, especially when it involved elderly congregation members who'd trusted Patricia with their charitable donations. The cancer research fundraiser that Patricia had supposedly organized had never delivered any money to the intended recipients. We've been tracking unusual financial activity in several church accounts managed by Mrs. Williams, Agent Rodriguez explained. Your evidence fills in gaps we've been trying to understand for months. The total theft appears to exceed $100,000 over 3 years. While the FBI began building their case against Patricia, Derek's gambling debts created their own form of justice. Big Mike's organization had grown tired of waiting for payment, and their collection methods were becoming increasingly aggressive. Tony's surveillance revealed men visiting Derek at my house, conversations that appeared heated and threatening. Derek's behavior became noticeably more paranoid as he started looking over his shoulder everywhere he went. Stephanie complained to her friends about Derek's strange mood swings and his fears about mysterious phone calls. I felt no sympathy for Derek's terror, but I worried about what desperate people might do to my house. The property represented my financial future, and I couldn't afford to have it damaged by loan sharks trying to collect gambling debts. Marcus filed an emergency motion requesting immediate property protection, citing Derek's criminal debt as a threat to marital assets. Judge Brennan, who was beginning to understand that this case involved more than typical divorce disputes, granted temporary measures to prevent Derek from selling or damaging the house. Well, Mr. Williams is hereby prohibited from transferring, selling, or encumbering the marital property pending a resolution of fraud allegations, Judge Brennan declared. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and contempt charges. Derek's panic became visible when he realized he couldn't sell the house to pay off his debts. The loan sharks didn't care about legal technicalities or court orders. They wanted their money, and Derek's promises about upcoming asset sales were no longer convincing. Sarah arrived from Portland on a Thursday morning, carrying 2 suitcases full of evidence that Patricia and Derek had assumed was destroyed years ago. Seeing her in person was like looking at my own future if we'd failed to stop their scheme. Sarah appeared older than her 32 years, with the cautious demeanor of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. They tried to make me disappear completely, Sarah explained as we organized her documents in Marcus's conference room. But I'm stronger than they thought, and I've spent 3 years preparing for this moment. Sarah's evidence included bank records proving Derek's gambling debts during their marriage, recordings of Patricia's manipulative conversations, and documentation of the forged loan documents. Most importantly, she'd maintained contact with several people who'd witnessed Patricia's earlier fraud but had been too intimidated to speak out at the time. Patricia threatened to destroy anyone who contradicted her story, White Sarah said. She has a talent for finding people's vulnerabilities and exploiting them, but some folks have been waiting for a chance to tell the truth. One of Sarah's witnesses was Patricia's former church pastor, Reverend Michael Stevens, who'd been forced to resign after questioning Patricia's financial management. Reverend Stevens had suspected embezzlement, but lacked proof until Sarah's investigation revealed the full scope of Patricia's theft. Whether Mrs. Williams used her position as treasurer to manipulate congregational finances for personal benefit, Reverend Stevens explained during his deposition. When I tried to audit the accounts, she launched a campaign to discredit my leadership and force my resignation. The church board believed her lies over my concerns. Patricia's pattern of destroying anyone who threatened her control was becoming clear. She didn't just steal money and assets. She systematically eliminated opposition by destroying reputations and relationships, leaving her victims isolated and powerless. The community response began shifting as Sarah's evidence became public. People who'd believed Patricia's lies about both Sarah and me started questioning what they'd been told. Helen organized informal neighborhood meetings where the truth could spread naturally, person to person without Patricia's manipulation. I feel terrible about how we treated both of you, our neighbor Janet confessed during one of these gatherings. Patricia was so convincing, and she seemed genuinely concerned about family welfare. We should have asked more questions instead of just believing her stories. The social rehabilitation felt good, but the legal vindication mattered more. Marcus presented Sarah's evidence to Judge Brennan in a hearing that completely reversed the preliminary ruling about my house ownership. Based on new evidence of fraudulent documentation and witness perjury, this court finds that the original property ownership claims were based on deliberately false information. Judge Brennan declared, Mrs. Thompson's inheritance rights to the marital property are hereby restored, and Mr. Williams is ordered to vacate the premises immediately. Derek's face went white as the judge spoke. Stephanie started crying, realizing that her dreams of living in my house were crumbling along with Derek's lies. Patricia sat rigid in the gallery, her usual smugness replaced by cold fury at seeing her carefully planned scheme unraveling. But the legal victory was only the beginning. Derek's gambling creditors had been monitoring the court proceedings, waiting to see if he'd gain access to sellable assets. When they realized the house was off limits, their patience finally ran out. Big Mike's collection team visited Derek that evening, making it clear that excuses and legal complications wouldn't satisfy the debt. Tony's surveillance captured Derek begging for more time, while two large men explained the consequences of continued delays. You've got 48 hours to produce $50,000 or start losing fingers, one of the collectors said, his voice clearly audible on Tony's recording equipment. We don't care about your divorce problems or your mommy's plans. You owe money and you're gonna pay it. Derek called me that night for the first time since this nightmare began. His voice shook with panic as he begged for help, apparently forgetting that he'd spent months destroying my life and stealing my home. Amina, please, you have to help me. These people are going to kill me if I don't pay them. I know I messed up, but I can make it right. Just let me sell the house and give you half the money. The audacity was breathtaking. After months of lies, theft, and betrayal, Derek actually expected me to save his life by giving up my inheritance. He seemed genuinely shocked when I told him that his gambling debts weren't my responsibility, and that I wouldn't sacrifice my financial security to enable his criminal behavior. You can't just let them hurt me, Derek pleaded. We were married. That has to mean something. But our marriage meant something to me, I replied. That's why your betrayal hurts so much. But your choices created this situation, and your choices will have to solve it. I hung up and immediately called Agent Rodriguez to report Derek's attempt to pressure me into financial cooperation with his criminal associates. The FBI was very interested in any evidence connecting Derek's fraud to organized crime operations. Patricia's response to the legal setbacks revealed the true depth of her malice. Rather than accepting defeat and trying to minimize the consequences, she escalated her attacks in ways that shocked even Sarah, who'd experienced Patricia's cruelty firsthand. Patricia began calling my workplace my neighbors, and anyone she could reach with increasingly wild accusations designed to destroy my reputation, even if she couldn't steal my money. She claimed I was mentally unstable, dangerous to children, and involved with drug dealers. She's like a rabid animal when cornered, Sarah observed after listening to some of Patricia's voicemails. The mask comes completely off, and you see the pure hatred underneath all that fake concern about family values. But Patricia's desperation was creating more evidence against her. Every threatening phone call, every slanderous accusation, and every attempt to intimidate witnesses was being documented by law enforcement. Her behavior was proving that the fraud charges were justified and that she posed an ongoing threat to public safety. The final blow came when Derek's loan shark creditors decided to pressure Patricia directly. They'd researched Derek's family situation and determined that his mother had access to money that could satisfy his debts. Big Mike's collection team paid Patricia a visit at her own home, explaining that Derek's obligations had become family responsibilities. Your son borrowed our money, and your son owes us $50,000 plus interest. They explained to Patricia during a conversation Tony managed to record from his surveillance van. We don't care where the money comes from, but we're going to get paid one way or another. Patricia discovered what Derek had learned months earlier. Owing money to criminal organizations was a problem that couldn't be solved through manipulation and lies. The loan sharks didn't care about her social standing, her church connections, or her ability to destroy reputations. They wanted cash, and they were prepared to take extreme measures to collect it. For the first time since this ordeal began, Patricia and Derek were facing consequences they couldn't control through fraud and intimidation. The predators had become prey, and their desperation was leading them to make increasingly desperate mistakes that would ultimately destroy them completely. The FBI raid on Patricia's house happened at 6 in the morning on a Wednesday, with Agent Rodriguez leading a team of 12 federal agents armed with search warrants for financial documents, computer equipment, and evidence of mail fraud. Neighbors gathered on their front lawns as Patricia was led away in handcuffs, her usual composure finally cracking under the weight of federal criminal charges. I watched the news coverage from Marcus's office, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion as reporters described the elaborate fraud scheme that had destroyed multiple families over several years. The charges included conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse, representing potential prison sentences that could keep Patricia locked up for decades. The search of Patricia's house revealed evidence that exceeded even our worst suspicions. FBI agents discovered a detailed filing system documenting her schemes against multiple victims, organized like a business operation with target assessment strategy notes and profit calculations. She kept records of everything, Agent Rodriguez explained during a briefing later that day. Financial profiles of potential targets, psychological assessments of their vulnerabilities, and step-by-step plans for isolating them from support systems. This wasn't opportunistic crime. It was systematic predation. Patricia had identified and researched at least 6 other women over the past 5 years, all of whom had married men from financially struggling families and brought significant assets to their relationships. Sarah and I were just the 2 victims who'd attracted her, sustained attention, but the potential victim list was much longer. Derek's arrest happened simultaneously, as federal agents found him hiding in a cheap motel outside the city limits. His attempt to flee demonstrated consciousness of guilt that would make his legal defense nearly impossible. Stephanie was arrested as a material witness to fraud her cooperation, with the scheme making her complicit in multiple federal crimes. The evidence against all three conspirators was overwhelming. Bank records showed Patricia's systematic theft from church accounts, with money being used to pay for forged documents and private investigator services. Derek's communications with Stephanie revealed detailed planning discussions about timing the divorce filing and coordinating false witness testimony. Most damaging was Patricia's own documentation of her criminal activities. She'd apparently viewed her scheme as such a clever enterprise that she'd kept detailed notes about what techniques worked best for manipulating victims and isolating them from potential supporters. While reading through her files was like studying a manual for psychological warfare, Marcus said after reviewing the FBI evidence. She analyzed your personality traits, identified your emotional triggers, and planned exactly how to exploit your independence and pride against you. Patricia's notes revealed that she'd chosen Derek specifically because his gambling problems made him desperate enough to participate in criminal schemes. She'd enabled his addiction to maintain control over him, using his debts as leverage to ensure his cooperation with increasingly serious crimes. The community reaction was swift and harsh as people realized how thoroughly Patricia had manipulated their trust and goodwill. Church members who'd believed her lies about embezzlement being caused by bookkeeping errors now understood they'd been systematically robbed by someone they'd trusted with their charitable donations. Reverend Stevens, who'd been forced to resign over his questions about Patricia's financial management, was invited to return to his position with full congregational support. His reinstatement became a symbol of the community's commitment to making amends for the damage Patricia's lies had caused. We allowed ourselves to be deceived because we wanted to believe that someone we'd trusted for years couldn't be capable of such evil, Reverend Stevens said during his return sermon, but evil often hides behind familiar faces and comfortable lies. Derek's gambling creditors showed no mercy when they learned about his arrest and the seizure of any assets he might have claimed. Big Mike's organization viewed Derek's legal troubles as proof that he'd never be able to repay his debts, making him a liability that needed to be eliminated permanently. Marcus arranged for Derek to be placed in protective custody within the federal detention system, recognizing that his gambling debts represented a legitimate threat to his life. Derek's cooperation with prosecutors became essential, not just for his legal defense, but for his physical survival. He's willing to testify against Patricia and provide details about her planning process, Marcus explained. The prosecution views his testimony as crucial for establishing the premeditated nature of the conspiracy. Derek's confession revealed the full scope of Patricia's manipulation tactics. She'd spent months coaching him on how to lie convincingly, how to appear sympathetic during court proceedings, and how to maintain false narratives, even under aggressive questioning. She made me practice telling the fake stories until I almost believed them myself, Derek admitted during his plea negotiation. She said lying was just another form of acting and that I needed to become the character she'd created for me. Patricia's psychological control over Derek extended far beyond the current fraud scheme. She'd been manipulating his relationships and financial decisions for years, using his gambling addiction and emotional dependence to maintain power over his choices. The revelation that Derek was as much a victim as a perpetrator complicated my feelings about his role in destroying my life. While his actions had caused enormous harm, Patricia's psychological abuse had shaped his behavior in ways that diminished his culpability without excusing his crimes. Stephanie's cooperation with the prosecution revealed additional details about Patricia's long-term planning and her recruitment of false witnesses. Patricia had cultivated relationships with people who could be bribed or intimidated into providing false testimony, creating a network of potential perjurers for future schemes. And she told me that destroying women like you was a public service, Stephanie said during her deposition. She claimed that independent women who kept their own money were destroying the institution of marriage and that families had the right to reclaim assets for the greater good. Patricia's ideological justification for her crimes revealed a twisted worldview that viewed women's financial independence as a threat to social order. She genuinely believed that stealing from wives was morally justified if it reinforced traditional family power structures. The civil lawsuits that followed the criminal charges allowed Sarah and me to recover substantial damages from Patricia's seized assets. Her house bank accounts and personal property were liquidated to pay restitution to the multiple victims of her schemes. Sarah used her settlement money to establish a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping fraud victims rebuild their lives in legal cases. What Patricia did to us was designed to make us feel powerless and isolated, Sarah explained during the organization's founding announcement. Our response is to ensure that other victims never have to face these battles alone. My house was officially returned to my sole ownership, with all claims by Derek's estate being permanently dismissed. Walking through the front door for the first time in months felt like reclaiming not just a property, but my entire identity and self-worth. Stephanie received the lightest sentence among the three conspirators due to her cooperation and relatively minor role in the overall scheme. Her testimony proved crucial for establishing the timeline of Patricia's planning and the methods used to recruit false witnesses. Derek received 5 years in federal prison for fraud conspiracy, with eligibility for early release if he continued cooperating with investigations into Patricia's other potential victims. His gambling creditors were eventually satisfied through the liquidation of his personal assets and Patricia's restitution payments. Patricia herself received the harshest sentence, 15 years in federal prison, for leading a multi-year conspiracy that had victimized multiple families and stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from charitable organizations. The judge's sentencing statement emphasized the calculated cruelty of her psychological manipulation tactics. Mrs. Williams didn't just steal money, Judge Harrison said during the sentencing hearing. She systematically destroyed families and relationships, leaving victims to question their own sanity and self-worth. This level of premeditated malice represents a profound threat to community trust and safety. The final vindication came when several other potential victims emerged after the news coverage of Patricia's arrest. Women from neighboring states contacted authorities with stories of similar manipulation attempts by Patricia and Derek, providing evidence that our case represented only a small portion of their criminal activities. The investigation ultimately revealed that Patricia had stolen over $300,000 from various victims and charitable organizations over 7 years. Her methodical documentation of these crimes provided prosecutors with overwhelming evidence that ensured maximum sentences for all involved. Justice had been served, but the emotional healing would take much longer than the legal proceedings. The betrayal by people I'd trusted and loved had damaged my ability to trust new relationships, leaving psychological scars that would require years of therapy to fully address. Yet seeing Patricia led away in handcuffs and knowing that she could never harm another family provided a sense of closure that made the long fight worthwhile. Sometimes justice delayed is not justice denied, especially when the delay allows for the complete exposure of evil that might otherwise remain hidden. 3 months after Patricia's sentencing, I stood in the kitchen of my reclaimed house, brewing coffee in my grandmother's ceramic mug and watching morning sunlight stream through windows that finally felt like they belonged to me again. The space looked different now, cleaner somehow, as if Patricia's malice had been scrubbed away along with her physical presence. The renovation work was nearly complete. I'd repainted every room that Derek and Stephanie had occupied, replacing their choices with colors that reflected my own personality rather than their temporary invasion. The master bedroom now had warm yellow walls instead of the cold gray they'd preferred, transforming it back into a sanctuary rather than a reminder of betrayal. Sarah had become more than just an ally in our legal battle. She'd become a genuine friend, someone who understood the particular trauma of having your reality systematically dismantled by people who claimed to love you. Our weekly coffee meetings had evolved into a true friendship based on shared experience and mutual respect. The nonprofit is getting more applications than we can handle, Sarah told me during one of our conversations. Apparently, the type of fraud Patricia specialized in is more common than anyone realized. We're documenting patterns that suggest organized networks of people who target women with inherited assets. The organization we'd established together, called Truth and Trust Recovery, had helped 37 women in its first 6 months of operation. Many of these women had experienced isolation and gaslighting similar to what Sarah and I had endured, feeling crazy and alone until they discovered they weren't the only victims of systematic fraud. Marcus and I had begun dating slowly, our relationship growing naturally from the professional partnership that had saved my life and home. His integrity during the darkest period of my ordeal had shown me what trustworthy love actually looked like, in stark contrast to Derek's manipulative betrayal. "Yo, I've never seen anyone fight back as effectively as you did," Marcus had told me after our first non-legal dinner together. "Most people would have given up when the evidence seemed so stacked against them. Your refusal to accept defeat inspired me to work harder than I've ever worked on any case." The romantic relationship felt healthy and genuine because it had been built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values, rather than the deception and manipulation that had characterized my marriage to Derek. Marcus had seen me at my weakest and most vulnerable moments yet. He'd chosen to stand with me rather than exploit my desperation. My sister Jenny had apologized tearfully once the truth about Patricia's manipulation became public. Her guilt over believing lies and abandoning me during my greatest time of need had damaged our relationship, but we were slowly rebuilding trust through honest conversations about how families can be divided by skilled manipulators. I feel like such an idiot for letting Patricia convince me you were the problem," Jenny said during one of our reconciliation talks. "She was so good at making her lies sound reasonable, at making you seem selfish for wanting to keep your own inheritance money." Jennifer Cruz, my boss at Reynolds Marketing, had personally apologized for questioning my stability and had offered me a promotion to senior account manager as a gesture of corporate regret. The Henderson account had specifically requested my return after learning about the fraud scheme that had targeted my reputation. "We should have investigated the source of those rumors instead of just accepting them," Jennifer admitted. "Corporate policy now requires verification of claims about employee behavior before any personnel actions can be taken." The community response had been overwhelming in its support and shame. Neighbors who'd believed Patricia's lies brought casseroles and flowers, organizing informal welcome home gatherings that helped me feel reconnected to the social networks Patricia had systematically poisoned. Helen, who'd provided the crucial recording that started our counterattack, had become something of a neighborhood hero for her role in exposing Patricia's fraud. Her courage in coming forward despite initial embarrassment about being deceived had inspired others to admit their mistakes and make amends. "I learned that being suspicious of gossip isn't being judgmental," Helen said during a neighborhood barbecue. "It's being wise. People who really care about you don't spread stories designed to damage your reputation." The financial restitution from Patricia's seized assets had allowed me to pay off the mortgage completely, giving me true ownership of my home without any lingering debt. The additional damages had been invested wisely, creating a financial foundation that would support my independence for years to come. Derek's letters from federal prison had started arriving about 6 months after his sentencing. His messages expressed genuine remorse for his role in the conspiracy, along with requests for forgiveness that I wasn't ready to grant. His gambling addiction treatment in prison seemed to be helping him understand how Patricia had exploited his weaknesses. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Derek had written in his most recent letter, "but I want you to know that I understand now how completely I betrayed everything good about our marriage. Patricia convinced me that lying to you was protecting family interests, but I realize now that I was just protecting my own cowardice." I'd responded briefly acknowledging his apology without offering forgiveness, but expressing hope that his treatment would prevent him from harming other families in the future. Forgiveness might come eventually, but it wouldn't be rushed or forced for the sake of appearing gracious. Stephanie had moved back to her hometown after serving 6 months in minimum security prison. Her cooperation with prosecutors had earned her a reduced sentence, but her reputation in our community had been permanently destroyed by her role in the fraud conspiracy. The most satisfying outcome was seeing Patricia's systematic criminal operation completely dismantled. FBI investigations had identified 11 other potential victims across 4 states, leading to additional charges that would keep Patricia in federal prison for the rest of her natural life. She'll never have the opportunity to destroy another family," Agent Rodriguez confirmed during our final debriefing. Her methods were sophisticated, but her arrogance in documenting everything made prosecution inevitable once we understood the scope of her activities. The psychological healing had been slower than the legal victory, requiring therapy to process the trauma of having my reality systematically attacked by people I'd trusted. Learning to trust my own judgment again after months of gaslighting had been one of the most difficult aspects of recovery. Betrayal trauma is particularly damaging because it combines the pain of loss with the confusion of deception. My therapist, Dr. Rachel Martinez, had explained, "Your brain had to process not just that people you loved had hurt you, but that your entire understanding of those relationships had been false." The therapy had taught me to recognize manipulation tactics and trust my instincts when relationships felt unhealthy or one-sided. The experience with Patricia and Derek had given me a graduate education in psychological abuse that would protect me from future predators. My father's memory had been honored through the ordeal in ways I hadn't expected. His life insurance money and business assets had ultimately been protected from theft, allowing his legacy to continue supporting his daughter's independence and security as he'd intended. "Dad would have been proud of how you fought for yourself," Jenny had said during one of our healing conversations. "He always taught us to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult and everyone else thinks you're wrong." The nonprofit work with Sarah had given deeper meaning to the suffering Patricia had inflicted. Every woman we helped escape from fraud schemes felt like a victory against the forces that had tried to destroy us. Our pain had been transformed into purpose, our healing into help for others. Standing in my kitchen that morning, surrounded by the life I'd nearly lost and the future I'd fought to preserve, I felt grateful for lessons I'd never wanted to learn. The betrayal had been devastating, but surviving it had revealed strength I'd never known I possessed. The house felt truly mine now, not just legally, but emotionally. Every room held memories of triumph rather than trauma, evidence of resilience rather than victimization. Patricia's attempt to steal my inheritance had ultimately strengthened my connection to my father's legacy and my own independence. As I prepared for another day of work, helping fraud victims rebuild their lives, I reflected on the life lesson this experience had taught me. Sometimes the people who try to destroy us actually teach us our own power. Patricia's elaborate scheme had been designed to make me feel helpless and isolated, but it had ultimately connected me with allies, revealed my inner strength, and given my life deeper purpose. The final victory wasn't just keeping my house or seeing Patricia imprisoned. It was discovering that I could face the worst betrayal imaginable and emerge stronger, wiser, and more committed to protecting others from similar harm. Have you ever had someone you trusted completely turn out to be someone entirely different? How did you find the strength to fight back when it seemed like everyone believed their lies over your truth? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about overcoming betrayal and finding justice. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear that it's possible to win against people who seem to have all the power. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your truth is worth fighting for, no matter how impossible the battle might seem.